Last month, or maybe last week, someone called you, a former colleague, a neighbor's adult son, someone who heard through someone that you used to run this particular kind of operation. They had a problem. You had 45 minutes, and somewhere in that conversation, you handed them something that would have cost them $1,000 from a consultant they found on LinkedIn. Then you hung up. And that was it. No invoice, no follow-up, no record that it happened, just expertise, delivered, absorbed, and filed under favor. That has a name. It's called an expertise leak. And if you've been out of your career for more than 6 months, there's a reasonable chance it's been happening more often than you've noticed. This video is about what to do with it. Specifically, the 3-part structure that converts what you're already doing informally into a defined, positioned, paid engagement model, without reinventing yourself, without cold outreach, and without a website, a certification, or anything you don't already have. By the end of this, you'll be able to name the niche, describe the client, and see exactly what a first paid conversation looks like. Here's the thing about the informal advice conversations you've been having. They are not random acts of generosity. They are market signals. Every time someone sought you out, not your former title, not your old institution, but specifically you, they were telling you something about the value of what lives inside your career history. The problem isn't that you don't have anything to sell. The problem is that you've been selling it for free and calling it something else. Think about the last 3 times someone asked for your input on something serious, not casual conversation. A real problem they brought to you because they didn't know who else to ask. What was the pattern? For most professionals navigating this transition, the pattern is remarkably consistent. The problems people bring are almost always inside a narrow band, the same domain, the same type of challenge, the same kind of decision they watched you make for 30 years. That consistency is not a coincidence. It is a reputation operating without a business card. And here's what the research on informal consulting behavior consistently shows. The professionals who transition most successfully to paid advisory work are not the ones who invented a new expertise after retirement. They're the ones who recognized that the expertise they'd been giving away already had a market and structured it. The behavior came first. The business model followed. Which means you are not at the beginning of this. You are further along than you think. The viewers of this channel who find this hardest to believe are often the ones with the most to offer. Not despite their expertise, because of it. When you've spent 30 years inside a field, what you know starts to feel like common sense. It stops feeling remarkable because it stopped surprising you a long time ago. But it still surprises the person on the other end of that phone call. That gap between what feels obvious to you and what feels impossible to them is the gap that pays. Now, let's look honestly at why more professionals in this transition aren't already doing this. Because the obvious path, the one most people reach for first, has 2 traps built into it, and both of them stall before they produce a single dollar. The first trap is overgeneralization. It sounds like this: I'll help organizations with leadership, or strategy, or operations. I have experience in all of those. That sentence is true. It is also unsellable. The professionals who stall longest in this transition are almost always the ones who lead with the breadth of their experience rather than the depth of a specific problem they solve. And breadth, no matter how impressive, does not give a prospective client a reason to call you specifically. A former hospital administrator who says, "I help healthcare organizations run better," is describing a category. A former hospital administrator who says, "I help mid-sized regional hospitals reduce readmission rates without adding clinical staff," is describing a solution. Those are not the same offer. And only one of them gets returned phone calls. The second trap is credential substitution. This one is more subtle and considerably more damaging. It sounds like this: I need to take a coaching certification first. I need to build a website. I need to figure out my brand. I'll start reaching out when I'm ready. Ready is a destination that keeps moving. The certification, the website, the brand, none of those are what a prospective client is buying. What they're buying is 30 years of your judgment applied to their specific problem. And that existed before you opened a browser tab. The professionals who launched paid advisory practices most quickly are not the ones who prepared the longest. They're the ones who had a conversation with someone who already knew them, before the website, before the business cards, before anything was ready, and let that conversation become a paid engagement. So the path forward is not broader, and it is not more prepared. It is more specific, and it starts with what you already have. Here is the structure: 3 parts. Each one builds on the last, and the only raw material any of them requires is the career you already had. Part 1. Name the problem you solve, not the career you had. Your title was a credential. It described your position inside an institution. What you're building now is not a position, it is a practice. And a practice is defined not by what you were called, but by what people came to you to fix. So the question is not, what was my role? The question is, what problems disappeared when I walked into a room? That reframe is not cosmetic. It is the entire foundation. A 30-year career in financial services is not an offer. I help family-owned businesses navigate the financial decisions that typically derail the transition from founder to second generation. That is an offer. One of those sentences gets a meeting. The other gets a polite nod. Take the problems people have actually brought to you in the last 12 months. Not hypothetical problems. Real ones. The phone calls. The coffee conversations. The emails from former colleagues that began with, "I have a situation, and I don't know who else to ask." Write down what those problems had in common. That pattern is your niche, already field-tested by the market. Part 2. Identify the person who has that problem right now. This is where most professionals in this transition reach for the wrong answer. They think about a type of organization, a sector, an industry. They try to describe a market. What they should be describing is a person, specifically, who is in the situation right now that you resolved 30 times over the course of your career. What is their title? What keeps them from sleeping? What have they already tried that didn't work? The more precisely you can describe that person, the shorter the path to finding them. And here's the part that removes almost all the friction. You already know some of them. They're in your network. They're the people who were 3 levels below you when you were operating at the top of your field, and who are now in exactly the positions you held, facing exactly the decisions you made, without the 30 years of scar tissue that would tell them what to do. That is your first client pool. It requires no cold outreach. It requires only a different kind of conversation with people who already know you. Part 3. Define what a first engagement produces for them. This is the piece that converts a conversation into a transaction. A client does not pay for your time, they pay for a result. And the result needs to be specific enough that they can picture it before they say yes. A 90-minute strategy session is a product. A 90-minute session that leaves you with a prioritized action plan for the next 60 days and a clear answer to the question you've been circling for 6 months. That is a result. The former asks someone to buy your time. The latter asks them to buy a specific future state. One of those is a much easier decision. You have been producing that result informally for months. You've been doing it in 45-minute phone calls that ended with the other person saying, "This was incredibly helpful," which is the unmonetized version of a satisfied client. The 3-part framework didn't add anything new. It named what was already happening and gave it a structure the market can respond to. That is the entire gap between where you are and where you want to be. If what's described in this video matches how you naturally operate, the advisory conversation, the problem-solving relationship, the informal dynamic you've already been living, there is a complete system for turning that into a structured, premium mentoring offer. It's called Mentor to Market, and it's linked in the description. 4 modules. A finished offer with positioning, pricing, and the language to describe it to the right person. Built specifically for professionals with 30+ years of accumulated expertise who are ready to make it intentional. If your instinct runs more toward formal consulting engagements than ongoing mentoring relationships, the second act blueprint covers that path, also in the description. So what does the first paid engagement actually look like? Not the 100th. The first, because that's the one that matters most. Not for the income, but for the proof. The first paid engagement answers the question the conditional value equation has been asking since the last day of work. It answers it in the most direct language the equation understands. Someone looked at what you know and decided it was worth paying for. Here's where the first engagement almost always comes from. Not a cold outreach campaign. Not a LinkedIn post. Not a website that's been optimized for search. It comes from a conversation with someone who already knows you. Specifically, someone who has already been on the receiving end of your informal advice and experienced what it produced. The conversation is not a sales pitch. It is a status update. Something like, "I've been formalizing the kind of advisory work I've been doing informally since I left, specifically around the problem you named in part 1. I'm taking on a small number of structured engagements this quarter, and given the work we've done together, I thought of you first. Would it be worth a 30-minute conversation to see if there's a fit? That sentence contains no claim you can't support. It references a real history. It positions the offer as selective rather than desperate. And it starts with someone who already knows the answer to the question, is this person's advice worth anything? The objection that surfaces most often at this stage is a specific one. But the people in my network are peers. They're not going to pay me. That's only partially true. Your direct peers may not be the right first clients. But your network is not only peers. It includes people who reported to you, who worked adjacent to you, who are 2 or 3 levels below you and are now in leadership positions, and who are navigating decisions that your 30 years of experience addresses directly. Those are not peers. Those are prospective clients who already have evidence of your credibility. The other path into first engagements runs through introductions. The people in your network who are not prospective clients themselves almost certainly know someone who is. A single conversation that ends with, "I don't think this is quite right for me, but I immediately thought of someone who's been dealing with exactly that. Would it be okay if I made an introduction?" has launched more consulting practices than any marketing strategy. You built 30 years of relationships inside a professional world that is now your distribution network. That network does not expire when the title does. If this framework opens something you want to take further, the next step is already built. Mentor to Market and the Second Act Blueprint are both linked in the description and in the pinned comment below. What's the last piece of informal advice you gave that you later realized was worth far more than nothing? And what stopped you from calling it what it was? Here is what this video was actually about. Not monetization, not business development, not a second career that requires you to become someone different. It was about the gap between what you've been doing and what you've been calling it. You've been solving problems. Real ones. For people who sought you out specifically. Not because of a website, not because of a LinkedIn post, but because your reputation preceded you into conversations you weren't even part of. That is not a hobby. That is a practice without a structure. The 3 parts of the framework didn't create anything new. They named what was already there and gave it the shape that a market can recognize and respond to. Name the problem you solve, not the career you had. Identify the person who has that problem right now. Define what a first engagement produces for them. That's the distance between where you are and where you want to be. It is shorter than the retirement industry wants you to believe. It does not require a rebrand. It does not require a certification. It does not require you to perform a version of ambition that feels foreign to someone who spent 30 years doing the real thing. Before this video ends, write one sentence that answers part 1. Not a business plan. Not a positioning document. One sentence that begins, "I help people who are dealing with," and ends with a specific problem your career prepared you to solve. Most professionals in this transition never write that sentence. They think about it. They mean to. They open a notebook and close it again. Write it. Because that sentence, that one sentence, is not a step towards something real. It is the beginning of something real. The expertise doesn't retire. Only the title does. And the market, the specific, real, existing market of people who need exactly what 30 years built inside you, is not waiting for you to become something new. It's waiting for you to make available what you already are.